Chapter 1 of the Constitution of Athens. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards. The Constitution of Athens, by Aristotle, translated by Sir Frederick Kenyon. Chapter 1. They were tried by a court empanelled from among the noble families, and sworn upon the sacrifices. The part of accuser was taken by Myron. They were found guilty of the sacrilege, and their bodies were cast out of their graves, and their race banished for evermore. Moreover, in addition to this, Epimenides the Cretan performed a purification of the city. Chapter 2. After this event there was contention for a long time between the upper classes and the populace. Not only was the constitution at this time oligarchical in every respect, but the poorer classes, men, women, and children, were the serfs of the rich. They were known as Pelata and also as Hectimari, because they cultivated the lands of the rich at the rent of a sixth part of the produce. The whole country was in the hands of a few persons, and if the tenants failed to pay their rent, they were liable to be haled into slavery, and their children with them. All loans were secured upon the debtor's person, a custom which prevailed until the time of Solon, who was the first to appear as a leader of the people. But the hardest and bitterest part of the constitution in the eyes of the masses was their state of serfdom. At the same time they were discontented with every other feature of their lot, for, to speak generally, they had no part nor share in anything. Chapter 3. Now the ancient constitution, as it existed before the time of Draco, was organized as follows. The magistrates were elected according to qualifications of birth and wealth. At first they governed for life, but subsequently for terms of 10 years. The first magistrates, both in date and in importance, were the king, the polemarch (commander in war), and the archon. The earliest of these offices was that of the king, which existed from ancestral antiquity. To this was added, secondly, the office of polemarch, on account of some of the kings proving feeble in war, for which reason Ion was invited to accept the post on an occasion of pressing need. The last of the three offices was that of the archon, which most authorities state to have come into existence in the time of Medon. Others assign it to the time of Acastus, and adduce as proof the fact that the 9 archons swear to execute their oaths, as in the days of Acastus, which seems to suggest that it was in his reign that the descendants of Codrus retired from the kingship in return for the prerogatives conferred upon the archon. Whichever way it be, the difference in date is small. But that it was the last of these magistracies to be created is shown by the fact that the archon has no part in the ancestral sacrifices, as the king and the polemarch have, but only in those of later origin. So it is only at a comparatively late date that the office of archon has become of great importance by successive accretions of power. The Thesmothetae were appointed many years afterwards, when these offices had already become annual, and the object of their creation was that they might publicly record all legal decisions, and act as guardians of them, with a view to executing judgment upon transgressors of the law. Accordingly, their office alone, of those which have been mentioned, was never of more than annual duration. So far then do these magistrates precede all others in point of date. At that time the 9 archons did not all live together. The king occupied the building now known as the Bacoleum near the Prytaneum, as may be seen from the fact that even to the present day the marriage of the king's wife to Dionysus takes place there. The Archon lived in the Prytaneum, the Polemarch in the Epiclysium. The latter building was formerly called the Polemarchium, but after Epilicos, during his term of office as Polemarch, had rebuilt it and fitted it up, it was called the Epiclysium. The Thesmothetae occupied the Thesmotheteum. In the time of Solon, however, they all came together into the Thesmotheteum. They had power to decide cases finally on their own authority, not, as now, merely to hold a preliminary hearing. Such, then, was the arrangement of the magistracies. The Council of Areopagus had as its constitutionally assigned duty the protection of the laws, but in point of fact it administered the greater and most important part of the government of the state, and inflicted personal punishments and fines summarily upon all who misbehaved themselves. This was the natural consequence of the facts that the Archons were elected under qualifications of birth and wealth, and that the Areopagus was composed of those who had served as Archons, for which latter reason the membership of the Areopagus is the only office which has continued to be a life magistracy to the present day. Chapter 4. Such was in outline the first constitution. But not very long after the events above recorded, in the archonship of Aristoteles, Draco drew up his legislation. The organization he established had the following form. The franchise was given to all who could furnish themselves with a military equipment. The 9 Archons and the treasurers were elected by this body from persons possessing an unencumbered property of not less than 10 minas, the less important officials from those who could furnish themselves with a military equipment, and the generals (strategi) and commanders of the cavalry (hipparchi) from those who could show an unencumbered property of not less than 100 minas, and had children born in lawful wedlock over 10 years of age. These officers were required to hold to bail the Prytanes, the Strategi, and the Hipparchi of the preceding year until their accounts had been audited, taking 4 securities of the same class as that to which the Strategi and the Hipparchi belonged. There was also to be a council consisting of 401 members, elected by lot from among those who possessed the franchise. Both for this and for the other magistracies, the lot was cast among those who were over 30 years of age, and no one might hold office twice until every one else had had his turn, after which they were to cast the lot afresh. If any member of the council failed to attend when there was a sitting of the council or of the assembly, he paid a fine to the amount of 3 drachmas if he was a Pentacosio Medimnus, 2 if he was a knight, and 1 if he was a Zeugites. The council of Areopagus was guardian of the laws, and kept watch over the magistrates to see that they executed their offices in accordance with the laws. Any person who felt himself wronged might lay an information before the council of Areopagus, on declaring what law was broken by the wrong done to him. But, as has been said before, loans were secured upon the persons of the debtors, and the land was in the hands of a few. Chapter 5. Now, seeing that such was the organization of the constitution, and that the many were in slavery to the few, the people rose against the upper class. The strife was keen, and for a long time the 2 parties were face to face with one another, till at last, by common consent, they appointed Solon to be mediator and archon, and committed the whole constitution to his hands. The immediate occasion of his appointment was his poem, which begins with the words, quote, I see, and within my heart deep sadness has claimed its place, as I look on the oldest home of the ancient Ionian race, slain by the sword. Close quote. In this poem he fights and disputes on behalf of each party in turn against the other, and finally he advises them to come to terms and put an end to the quarrel existing between them. By birth and reputation Solon was one of the foremost men of the day, but in wealth and position he was of the middle class, as is generally agreed, and is indeed established by his own evidence in these poems, where he exhorts the wealthy not to be grasping. Quote, "But ye who have store of good, who are sated and overflow, restrain your swelling soul, and still it and keep it low. Let the heart that is great within you be trained a lowlier way. Ye shall not have all at your will, and we will not for ever obey." Close quote. Indeed, he constantly ascribes the origin of the conflict to the rich, and accordingly, at the beginning of the poem, he says that he fears "the love of wealth and an overweening mind," evidently meaning that it was through these that the quarrel arose. Chapter 6. As soon as he was at the head of affairs, Solon liberated the people once and for all by prohibiting all loans on the security of the debtor's person, and at the same time he made laws by which he cancelled all debts, public and private. This measure is commonly called the seisachtheia (removal of burdens), since thereby the people had their loads removed from them. In connection with it, some persons try to traduce the character of Solon. It so happened that, when he was about to enact the seisachtheia, he announced his intention to some members of the upper class, whereupon, as the partisans of the popular party say, his friends stole a march on him, while those who wish to attack his character maintain that he too had a share in the fraud himself. For these persons borrowed money and bought up a large amount of land, and so, when a short time afterwards all debts were cancelled, they became wealthy, and this, they say, was the origin of the families which were afterwards looked on as possessing wealth from primeval times. However, the story of the popular party is by far the most probable. A man like Solon, who was so moderate and just in all his other actions, that, although he might have put the laws beneath his feet and have established himself as tyrant, he preferred instead to incur the hostility of both parties by placing his honour and the general welfare above his personal aggrandizement, is not likely to have consented to defile his hands by such a petty and unworthy transaction. That he had this absolute power is, in the first place, indicated by the desperate condition of the country. Moreover, he mentions it himself repeatedly in his poems, and it is admitted by all. We are therefore bound to consider this accusation to be false. Chapter 7. Next, Solon drew up a constitution and enacted new laws, and the statutes of Draco ceased to be used with the exception of those relating to murder. The laws were inscribed on the pillars and set up in the king's porch, and all swore to obey them, and the 9 archons made oath upon the stone, declaring that they would dedicate a golden statue if they should transgress any of them. This is the origin of the oath to that effect which they take to the present day. Solon ratified his laws for 100 years, and the following was the fashion in which he organized the constitution. He divided the population according to property into 4 classes, just as it had been divided before, namely, Pentacosio Medimni, knights, Zeugite, and Thetes. The various magistracies, namely, the 9 archons, the treasurers, the commissioners for public contracts, Polite, the 11, and the exchequer clerks, Colacrete, he assigned to the Pentacosio Medimni, the knights, and the Zeugite, giving offices to each class in proportion to the value of their rateable property. To those who ranked among the Thetes he gave nothing but a place in the assembly and in the juries. A man had to rank as a Pentacosio Medimnus if he made from his own land 500 measures, whether liquid or solid. Those ranked as knights who made 300 measures, or, as some say, those who were able to maintain a horse. In support of the latter definition, they adduce the name of the class, which may be supposed to be derived from this fact, and also some votive offerings of early times. For in the Acropolis there is a votive offering, a statue of Diphilos, bearing this inscription, quote, "The son of Diphilos, Anthemian hight, raised from the Thetes, and become a knight, did to the gods this sculptured charger bring, for his promotion a thank-offering." And a horse stands beside the man, which seems to show that this was what was meant by belonging to the rank of knight. At the same time, it seems more reasonable to suppose that this class, like the Pentacosio Medimni, was defined by the possession of an income of a certain number of measures. Those ranked as Zugite who made 200 measures, liquid or solid, and the rest ranked as Thetes, and were not eligible for any office. Hence it is that even at the present day, when a candidate for any office is asked to what rank he belongs, no one would think of saying that he belonged to the Thetes. Chapter 8. The elections to the various offices Solon enacted should be by lot out of candidates selected by each of the tribes. Each tribe selected 10 candidates for the 9 archonships, and among these the lot was cast. Hence it is still the custom for each tribe to choose 10 candidates by lot, and then the lot is again cast among these. A proof that Solon regulated the elections to office according to the property classes may be found in the law still in force for the election of the treasurers, which enacts that they shall be chosen from the Pentacosio Medimni. Such was Solon's legislation with respect to the 9 archons, whereas in early times the council of Areopagus summoned suitable persons according to its own judgment, and appointed them for the year to the several offices. There were 4 tribes, as before, and 4 tribe kings. Each tribe was divided into 3 trities (thirds), with 12 naucratis in each, and the naucratis had offices of their own, called naucrati, whose duty it was to superintend the current receipts and expenditure. Hence, among the laws of Solon now obsolete, it is repeatedly written that the naucrati are to receive and spend out of the naucratic fund. Solon also appointed a council of 400, 100 from each tribe, but he assigned to the Areopagus the duty of superintending the laws, so that it continued, as before, to be the guardian of the constitution in general. It kept watch over the citizens in all the most important matters, and corrected offenders, having full powers to inflict either fines or personal punishment. The money received in fines it brought up into the Acropolis, without assigning the reason for the punishment. It also tried those who conspired for the overthrow of the state, Solon having enacted a process of impeachment to deal with such offenders. Further, since he saw the state often engaged in internal disputes, while many of the citizens from sheer indifference waited to see what would turn up, he made a law with express reference to such persons, enacting that any one who, in a time of civil factions, did not take up arms with either party, should lose his rights as a citizen, and cease to have any part in the state. Chapter 9. Such, then, was his legislation concerning the magistrates of the state. There are 3 points in the constitution of Solon which appear to be its most democratic features. First, and most important, the prohibition of loans on the security of the debtor's person. Secondly, the right of every person who so willed to claim redress on behalf of any one to whom wrong was being done. Thirdly, the the institution of the appeal to the law courts. And it is by means of this last, they say, that the masses have gained strength most of all, since when the democracy is master of the voting power, it is master of the constitution. Moreover, since the laws were not drawn up in simple and explicit terms, but, like the one concerning inheritances and wards of state, disputes inevitably occurred, and the courts had to decide in every matter, whether public or private. Some persons, in fact, believe that Solon deliberately made the laws indefinite in order that the final decision might be in the hands of the people. This, however, is not at all probable, and the reason, no doubt, was that it was impossible to attain ideal perfection when framing a law in general terms, for we must judge of his intentions, not from the actual results in the present day, but from the general tenor of the rest of his legislation. Chapter X. These seem to be the democratic features of his laws. But, in addition, before the period of his legislation, he made his abolition of debts, and, after it, his increase in the standards of weights and measures, and of the currency. During his term of office, the measures were made larger than those of Phaedon, and the mina, which previously had a standard of 70 drachmas, was raised to the full 100. The standard coin, in earlier times, was the 2-drachma piece. He also made weights corresponding with the coinage, 63 minas going to the talent, and the odd 3 minas were distributed among the stators and the other values. Chapter XI. When he had completed his organization of the constitution in the manner that has been described, he found himself beset by people coming to him and harassing him concerning his laws, criticizing here and questioning there, till, as he wished neither to alter what he had decided on, nor yet to be an object of ill will to every one by remaining in Athens, he set off on a journey to Egypt with the combined objects of trade and travel, giving out that he should not return for 10 years. He considered that there was no call for him to expound the laws personally, but that every one should obey them just as they were written. Moreover, his position at this time was unpleasant. Many members of the upper class had been estranged from him on account of his abolition of debts, and both parties were alienated through their disappointment at the condition of things which he had created. The mass of the people had expected him to make a complete redistribution of all property, and the upper class hoped he would restore everything to its former position, or at any rate make but a small change. He, however, had resisted both classes. He might have made himself a despot by attaching himself to whichever party he chose, but he preferred, though at the cost of incurring the enmity of both, to save the country and establish the best laws that were possible. Chapter XII. The truth of this view of Solon's policy is established alike by the common consent of all, and by the mention which he has himself made of the matter in his poems. Thus, I gave to the mass of the people such rank as befitted their need. I took not away their honor, and I granted not to their greed. While those who were rich in power, who in wealth were glorious and great, I bethought me that naught should befall them unworthy their splendor and state. So I stood with my shield outstretched, and both were safe in its sight, and I would not that either should triumph, when the triumph was not with right. Again, he declares how the mass of the people ought to be treated. But thus will the people best the voice of their leaders obey, when neither too slack is the rein, nor violence holdeth the sway. For satiety breedeth a child, the presumption that spurns control, when riches too great are poured upon men of unbalanced soul. And again, elsewhere, he speaks about the persons who wished to redistribute the land. So they came in search of plunder, and their cravings knew no bound. Every one among them deeming endless wealth would here be found, and that I with glozing smoothness hid a cruel mind within. Fondly then and vainly dreamt they, now they raise an angry din, and they glare askance in anger, and the light within their eyes burns with hostile flames upon me, yet therein no justice lies. All I promised, fully wrought I with the gods at hand to cheer, not beyond in folly ventured, never to my soul was dear with a tyrant's force to govern, nor to see the good and base side by side in equal portion share the rich home of our race. Once more he speaks of the abolition of debts, and of those who before were in servitude, but were released owing to the Seisachtheia. Wherefore I freed the racked and tortured crowd from all the evils that beset their lot. Thou, when slow time brings justice in its train, O mighty mother of the Olympian gods, dark earth, thou best canst witness from whose breast I swept the pillars broadcast planted there, and made thee free who hadst been slave of yore. And many a man whom fraud or law had sold, far from his god-built land, an outcast slave, I brought again to Athens; yea, and some exiles from home through debt's oppressive load, speaking no more the dear Athenian tongue, but wandering far and wide, I brought again, and those that here in vilest slavery crouched 'neath a master's frown, I set them free. Thus might and right were yoked in harmony, since by the force of law I won my ends, and kept my promise. Equal laws I gave to evil and to good, with even hand drawing straight justice for the lot of each. But had another held the goad as I, one in whose heart was guile and greediness, he had not kept the people back from strife. For had I granted now what pleased the one, then what their foes devised within their hearts, of many a man this state had been bereft. Therefore I showed my might on every side, turning at bay like wolf among the hounds. And again he reviles both parties for their grumblings in the times that followed. Nay, if one must lay blame where blame is due, were it not for me, the people ne'er had set their eyes upon these blessings e'en in dreams, while greater men, the men of wealthier life, should praise me and should court me as their friend. For had any other man, he says, received this exalted post, he had not kept the people back, nor ceased till he had robbed the richness of the milk, but I stood forth a landmark in the midst, and barred the foes from battle. End of chapter 12. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Chapter 13 of the Constitution of Athens by Aristotle, translated by Sir Frederick Kenyon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards. Chapter 13. Such then were Solon's reasons for his departure from the country. After his retirement, the city was still torn by divisions. For 4 years, indeed, they lived in peace, but in the 5th year after Solon's government, they were unable to elect an archon on account of the dissensions, and again, 4 years later, they elected no archon for the same reason. Subsequently, after a similar period had elapsed, Damasius was elected archon, and he governed for 2 years and 2 months, until he was forcibly expelled from his office. After this it was agreed, on account of the dissensions, to elect 10 archons, 5 from the Eupatridae, 3 from the Agroici, and 2 from the Demiurgi. And these officers ruled for the year following Damasius. It is clear from this that the archon was at that time the magistrate who possessed the greatest power, since it is always in connection with this office that conflicts are seen to arise. But altogether they were in a continual state of internal disorder. Some found the cause and justification of their discontent in the abolition of debts, because thereby they had been reduced to poverty. Others were dissatisfied with the political constitution, because it had undergone a revolutionary change, while with others the motive was found in personal rivalries among themselves. The parties at this time were 3 in number. First, there was the party of the shore, whose leader was Megacles, the son of Alcmaeon, which was considered to aim at a moderate form of government. Then there were the men of the plain, who desired an oligarchy, and were led by Lycurgus. And thirdly, there were the men of the highlands, at the head of whom was Pisistratus, who was looked on as an extreme democrat. To this latter party were attached those who had been deprived of the debts due to them, from motives of poverty, and those who were not of pure descent, from motives of personal apprehension. A proof of this is seen in the fact that, after the tyranny was overthrown, a revision was made of the citizen roll on the ground that many persons were partaking in the franchise without having a right to it. The names given to the respective parties were derived from the districts in which they held their lands. Chapter 14. Pisistratus had the reputation of being an extreme democrat, and he also had distinguished himself greatly in the war with Megara. Taking advantage of this, he wounded himself, and by representing that his injuries had been inflicted on him by his political rivals, he persuaded the people through a motion proposed by Aristion to grant him a bodyguard. After he had got these club bearers, as they were called, he made an attack with them on the people, and seized the Acropolis. This happened in the archonship of Commaeus, 31 years after the legislation of Solon. It is related that, when Pisistratus asked for his bodyguard, Solon opposed the request, and declared that in so doing he proved himself wiser than half the people, and braver than the rest. Wiser than those who did not see that Pisistratus designed to make himself tyrant, and braver than those who saw it and kept silence. But when all his words availed nothing, he carried forth his armor and set it up in front of his house, saying that he had helped his country so far as lay in his power (he was already a very old man), and that he called on all others to do the same. Solon's exhortations, however, proved fruitless, and Pisistratus assumed the sovereignty. His administration was far more like a constitutional government than the rule of a tyrant. But before his power was firmly established, the adherents of Megacles and Lycurgus made a coalition and drove him out. This took place in the archonship of Hegesias, 5 years after the first establishment of his rule. 11 years later, Megacles, being in difficulties in a party struggle, again opened negotiations with Pisistratus, proposing that the latter should marry his daughter, and on these terms he brought him back to Athens by a very primitive and simple-minded device. He first spread abroad a rumour that Athena was bringing back Pisistratus, and then, having found a woman of great stature and beauty, named Phae (according to Herodotus, of the deme of Paeania, but, as others say, a Thracian flower seller of the deme of Colitus), he dressed her in garb resembling that of the goddess, and brought her into the city with Pisistratus. The latter drove in on a chariot with the woman beside him, and the inhabitants of the city, struck with awe, received him with adoration. Chapter 15. In this manner did his first return take place. He did not, however, hold his power long. For about 6 years after his return, he was again expelled. He refused to treat the daughter of Megacles as his wife, and being afraid, in consequence of a combination of the two opposing parties, he retired from the country. First, he led a colony to a place called Ryculus, in the region of the Thermaic Gulf, and thence he passed to the country in the neighbourhood of Mount Pangaeus. Here he acquired wealth and hired mercenaries, and not till 10 years had elapsed did he return to Eretria and make an attempt to recover the government by force. In this he had the assistance of many allies, notably the Thebans and Lygdames of Naxos, and also the knights who held the supreme power in the constitution of Eretria. After his victory in the battle of Pellene, he recovered the sovereignty, and when he had disarmed the people, he at last had his tyranny securely established, and was able to take Naxos, and set up Lygdames as ruler there. He effected the disarmament of the people in the following manner. He held a review in full armour in the Theseum, and began to make a speech to the people. He spoke, however, in a low voice, and when the people called out that they could not hear him, he bade them come up to the entrance of the Acropolis, in order that his voice might be better heard. Then, while he continued to speak to them at great length, men whom he had appointed for the purpose collected the arms, and locked them up in the neighbouring chambers of the Theseum, and came and made a signal to him. Pisistratus, accordingly, when he had finished the rest of what he had to say, told the people also what had happened to their arms, adding that they were not to be surprised or alarmed, but go home and attend to their private affairs, while he would for the future manage all the business of the state. Chapter 16. Such was the origin and such the vicissitudes of the tyranny of Pisistratus. His administration was temperate, as has been said before, and more like constitutional government than a tyranny. Not only was he in every respect humane and mild, and ready to forgive those who offended, but in addition he advanced money to the poorer people to help them in their labours, so that they might make their living by agriculture. In this he had two objects. First, that they might not spend their time in the city, but might be scattered over all the face of the country; and secondly, that, being moderately well off and occupied with their own business, they might have neither the wish nor the time to attend to public affairs. At the same time his revenues were increased by the thorough cultivation of the country, since he imposed a tax of 1/10 on all the produce. For the same reasons he instituted the local justices, and often made expeditions in person into the country to inspect it, and to settle disputes between individuals, that they might not come into the city and neglect their farms. It was in one of these progresses that, as the story goes, Pisistratus had his adventure with the man in the district of Hymettus, who was cultivating the spot afterwards known as tax-free farm. He saw a man digging and working at a very stony piece of ground with a stake, and being surprised, he sent his attendant to ask what he got out of this plot of land. Aches and pains, said the man, and of these Pisistratus has got to have his 10th. The man spoke without knowing who his questioner was, but Pisistratus was so pleased with his frank speech and his industry that he granted him exemption from all taxes. And so, in matters in general, he burdened the people as little as possible with his government, but always cultivated peace, and kept them in all quietness. Hence the tyranny of Pisistratus was often spoken of proverbially as the age of gold, since later the government became much harsher, owing to the excesses of his sons. The quality which received most praise of all was his popular and kindly disposition. In his whole administration he was accustomed to observe the laws without giving himself any exceptional privileges. Once he was summoned on a charge of homicide before the Areopagus, and he appeared in person to make his defense. But the prosecutor was afraid to present himself, and abandoned the case. For these reasons his government continued long, and whenever he was expelled, he regained his position easily. The majority alike of the upper class and of the people were in his favour. The former he won by his social intercourse with them, the latter by the assistance which he gave to their private purses, and his nature fitted him to win the hearts of both. Moreover, the laws in reference to tyrants at that time in force at Athens were very mild, especially the one which applies more particularly to the establishment of a tyranny. The law ran as follows: quote, "These are the ancestral statutes of the Athenians. If any persons shall make an attempt to establish a tyranny, or if any person shall join in setting up a tyranny, he shall lose his civic rights, both himself and his whole house." Close quote. Chapter 17. Thus did Pisistratus grow old in the possession of power, and he died a natural death in the archonship of Philonius, 33 years from the time at which he first established himself as tyrant, during 19 of which he was in the possession of power; the rest he spent in exile. It is evident from this that the story is mere gossip which states that Pisistratus was the youthful favourite of Solon, and commanded in the war against Megara for the recovery of Salamis. It will not harmonize with their respective ages, as any one may see who will reckon up the years of the life of each of them, and the dates at which they died. After the death of Pisistratus his sons took up the government, and conducted it on the same system. He had two sons by his first and legitimate wife, Hippias and Hipparchus, and two by his Argive consort, Iophon and Hegesistratus, who had the surname of Thessalos; for Pisistratus took a wife from Argos of the name of Timonassa, the daughter of a man of Argos named Gorgilus. She had previously been the wife of Archinos of Ambracia, one of the descendants of Cypselos. This was the origin of his friendship with the Argives, and 1,000 of them were brought over by Hegesistratus, and fought on his side in the battle at Pellene. Some authorities say that this marriage took place after his first expulsion from Athens, others while he was in possession of the government. Chapter 18. Hippias and Hipparchus assumed the control of affairs on grounds alike of standing and of age; but Hippias, as being the elder, and being also naturally of a statesmanlike and shrewd disposition, was really the head of the government. Hipparchus was youthful in disposition, amorous, and fond of literature, and it was he who invited to Athens Anacreon, Simonides, and the other poets. Thessalos was much junior in age, and was violent and headstrong in his behaviour. It was from his character that all the evils arose which befell the house. He became enamoured of Harmodius, and, since he failed to win his affection, he lost all restraint upon his passion, and after several other insults, he finally manifested his rage by forbidding the sister of Harmodius to take the part of a basket-bearer in the Panathenaic procession, insulting Harmodius at the same time by alleging as his reason that he was a person of loose life. The result of this was that Harmodius and Aristogiton, in a frenzy of wrath, did their celebrated deed in conjunction with a number of confederates. But while they were watching Hippias in the Acropolis during the Panathenaea (Hippias at this moment was awaiting the arrival of the procession, while Hipparchus was organizing its dispatch), they saw one of the persons privy to the plot talking familiarly with him. Thinking that he was betraying them, and desiring to do something before they were arrested, they rushed down and made their attempt without waiting for the rest of their confederates, and killed Hipparchus near the Leocorium while he was engaged in arranging the procession. This, however, ruined the design as a whole, and of the two leaders, Harmodius was killed on the spot by the guards, while Aristogiton was arrested later, and perished after suffering long tortures. While under the torture, he accused many persons who belonged by birth to the most distinguished families, and were also personal friends of the tyrants. At first the government could find no clue to the conspiracy, for the current story, that Hippias made all who were taking part in the procession leave their arms, and then detected those who were carrying secret daggers, cannot be true, since at that time they did not bear arms in the processions, this being a custom instituted at a later period by the democracy. According to the story of the popular party, Aristogiton accused the friends of the tyrants with the deliberate intention that the latter might commit an impious act, and at the same time weaken themselves, by putting to death innocent men who were their own friends. Others say that he told no falsehood, but was betraying the actual accomplices. At last, when for all his efforts he could not obtain release by death, he promised to give further information against a number of other persons, and having induced Hippias to give him his hand to confirm his word, as soon as he had hold of it, he reviled him for giving his hand to the murderer of his brother, till Hippias, in a frenzy of rage, lost control of himself, and drew out his dagger and dispatched him. Chapter 19. After this event, the tyranny became much harsher. In consequence of his vengeance for his brother, and of the execution and banishment of a large number of persons, Hippias became a distrustful and an embittered man. About 3 years after the death of Hipparchus, finding his position in the city insecure, he set about fortifying Munichia, with the intention of removing thither. While he was still engaged on this work, however, he was expelled by Cleomenes, king of Lacedaemon, in consequence of the Spartans being continually warned by oracles to overthrow the tyranny. The oracles were obtained in the following way. The Athenian exiles, headed by the Alcmeonidae, could not by their own power effect their return, but failed continually in their attempts. Among their other failures, they fortified a post in Attica, Lipsydrium, above Mount Parnes, and were there joined by some partisans from the city. But they were besieged by the tyrants, and reduced to surrender. After this disaster, the following became a popular drinking song. Quote, Ah, for Lipsydrium, name of woe and treachery! Ah, for the men laid low, nobly born, and great indeed! Well did they prove themselves at need of noble sires, a noble seed. Close quote. Having failed, then, in every other method, they took the contract for rebuilding the temple at Delphi, using for that purpose the considerable wealth which they possessed, with the view of securing the help of the Lacedaemonians. The Pythia, accordingly, was continually enjoining on the Lacedaemonians, who came to consult the oracle, that they must free Athens, till finally she succeeded in turning the Spartans in that direction, although the house of Pisistratus was connected with them by ties of hospitality. At the same time, the resolution of the Lacedaemonians was at least equally due to the friendship which had been formed between the house of Pisistratus and Argos. Accordingly, they first sent Anchimolus by sea at the head of an army, but he was defeated and killed through the arrival of Cineas of Thessaly to support the sons of Pisistratus with a force of 1,000 horsemen. Then, being roused to anger by this disaster, they sent their king, Cleomenes, by land at the head of a larger force, and he, after defeating the Thessalian cavalry, when they attempted to intercept his march into Attica, shut up Hippias within what was known as the Pelargic wall, and blockaded him there with the assistance of the Athenians. While he was sitting down before the place, it so happened that the sons of the Pisistratidae were captured in an attempt to make their escape from the country, upon which the tyrants capitulated on condition of the safety of their children, and surrendered the Acropolis to the Athenians, 5 days being first allowed them to remove their effects. This took place in the archonship of Harpactides, after they had held the tyranny for about 17 years, since their father's death, or in all, including the period of their father's rule, for 49 years. Chapter 20. After the overthrow of the tyranny, the rival leaders in the state were Isagoras, son of Tisander, a partisan of the tyrants, and Cleisthenes, who belonged to the family of the Alcmeonidae. Cleisthenes, being beaten in the political clubs, attracted the people to his side by giving the franchise to the masses. Thereupon, Isagoras, finding himself left inferior in power, invited Cleomenes, who was united to him by ties of hospitality, to return to Athens, and persuaded him to drive out the pollution, a plea derived from the fact that the Alcmeonidae were supposed to be under the curse of pollution. On this, Cleisthenes, with a few of his adherents, retired from the country, and Cleomenes expelled, as polluted, 700 Athenian families. Having effected this, he next attempted to dissolve the council, and to set up Isagoras and 300 of his partisans as the supreme power in the state. The council, however, resisted. The populace flocked together, and Cleomenes and Isagoras, with their adherents, took refuge in the Acropolis. Here the people sat down and besieged them for 2 days, and on the 3rd they agreed to let Cleomenes and all his followers depart, while they sent to summon Cleisthenes and the other exiles back to Athens. When the people had thus obtained the command of affairs, Cleisthenes was their chief and the leader of the people, and this was natural, for the Alcmeonidae were perhaps the chief cause of the expulsion of the tyrants, and for the greater part of their rule they were at perpetual war with them. But even earlier than the attempts of the Alcmeonidae, Sidon made an attack on the tyrants, whence there was also a popular drinking song addressed to him. Pour a health yet again, boy, to Sidon, forget not this duty to do, if a health is an honor befitting the name of a good man and true. Chapter 21. The people, therefore, had good reason to place confidence in Cleisthenes. Accordingly, when at this time he found himself at the head of the masses, 3 years after the expulsion of the tyrants, in the archonship of Isagoras, his first step was to distribute the whole population into 10 tribes in place of the existing 4, with the object of intermixing the members of the different tribes, so that more persons might have a share in the franchise. From this arose the saying, "Do not look at the tribes," addressed to those who wished to scrutinize the lists of the old families. Next he made the council to consist of 500 members instead of 400, each tribe now contributing 50, whereas formerly each had sent 100. The reason why he did not organize the people into 12 tribes was that he might not have to divide them according to the already existing tridias, for the 4 tribes had 12 tridias, so that he would not have achieved his object of redistributing the population in fresh combinations. Further, he divided the country by demes into 30 parts, 10 from the districts about the city, 10 from the coast, and 10 from the interior. These he called tridias, and he assigned 3 of them by lot to each tribe in such a way that each should have 1 portion in each of these 3 divisions. All who lived in any given deme he declared fellow demesmen, to the end that the new citizens might not be exposed by the habitual use of family names, but that men might be known by the names of their demes. And accordingly it is by the names of their demes that the Athenians still speak of one another. He also instituted demarchs, who had the same duties as the previously existing Naucradi. the demes being made to take the place of the Naucratis. He gave names to the demes, some from the localities to which they belonged, some from the persons who founded them, since some of them no longer corresponded to localities possessing names. On the other hand, he allowed everyone to retain his family and clan and religious rights according to ancestral custom. The names given to the tribes were the 10 which the Pythia appointed out of the 100 selected national heroes. End of chapter 21. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Chapter 22 of the Constitution of Athens by Aristotle. Translated by Sir Frederick Kenyon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards. Chapter 22. By these reforms, the constitution became much more democratic than that of Solon. The laws of Solon had been obliterated by disuse during the period of the tyranny, and new ones had been drawn up in their place by Cleisthenes, with the object of securing the goodwill of the masses. Among these was the law concerning ostracism. 4 years after the establishment of this system, in the archonship of Hermocreon, they first imposed upon the Council of 500 the oath which they take to the present day. Next, they began to elect the generals according to tribes, one from each tribe, while the polemarch was the commander of the whole army. Then, 11 years later, they won the victory of Marathon in the archonship of Phenipos, and 2 years after this victory, when the people had now gained self-confidence, they, for the first time, made use of the law of ostracism. This was originally passed as a precaution against men in high office, because Pisistratus took advantage of his position as a popular leader and general to make himself tyrant, and the first person ostracized was one of his relatives, Hipparchus, son of Charmos, of the deme of Colletus, the very person on whose account especially Cleisthenes had passed a law, as he wished to get rid of him. Hitherto, however, he had escaped, for the Athenians, with the usual leniency of the democracy, allowed all the partisans of the tyrants, who had not joined in their evil deeds in the time of the troubles, to remain in the city, and the chief and leader of these was Hipparchus. Then, in the very next year, in the archonship of Telesinos, they, for the first time since the tyranny, elected, tribe by tribe, the 9 archons by lot out of the 500 candidates selected by the demes, all the earlier ones having been elected by vote. And in the same year, Megacles, son of Hippocrates, of the deme of Alopaci, was ostracized. Thus, for 3 years, they continued to ostracize the friends of the tyrants, on whose account the law had been passed. But in the following year, they began to remove others as well, including any one who seemed to be more powerful than was expedient. The first person unconnected with the tyrants who was ostracized was Xanthippus, son of Eriphron. 2 years later, in the archonship of Nicodemus, the mines of Meronia were discovered, and the state made a profit of 100 talents from the working of them. Some persons advised the people to make a distribution of the money among themselves, but this was prevented by Themistocles. He refused to say on what he proposed to spend the money, but he bade them lend it to the 100 richest men in Athens, 1 talent to each, and then, if the manner in which it was employed pleased the people, the expenditure should be charged to the state, but otherwise the state should receive the sum back from those to whom it was lent. On these terms he received the money, and with it he had 100 triremes built, each of the 100 individuals building 1. And it was with these ships that they fought the battle of Salamis against the barbarians. About this time Aristides, the son of Lysimachus, was ostracized. 3 years later, however, in the archonship of Hypsicides, all the ostracized persons were recalled on account of the advance of the army of Xerxes, and it was laid down for the future that persons under sentence of ostracism must live between Garestos and Scaleum on pain of losing their civic rights irrevocably. Chapter 23. Up to this point had the city progressed by this time, growing gradually with the growth of the democracy. But after the Persian wars, the council of Areopagus once more developed strength and assumed the control of the state. It did not acquire this supremacy by virtue of any formal decree, but because it had been the cause of the battle of Salamis being fought. When the generals were utterly at a loss how to meet the crisis, and made proclamation that every one should see to his own safety, the Areopagus provided a donation of money, distributing 8 drachmas to each member of the ship's crews, and so prevailed on them to go on board. On these grounds it obtained a great advance in public estimation, and during this period Athens was well administered. At this time they devoted themselves to the prosecution of the war, and were in high repute among the Greeks, and the command by sea was conferred upon them in spite of the opposition of the Lacedaemonians. The leaders of the people during this period were Aristides, son of Lysimachus, and Themistocles, son of Neocles, of whom the latter devoted himself to the conduct of war, while the former had the reputation of being a clever statesman, and the most upright man of his time. Accordingly, the one was usually employed as general, the other as a political adviser. The rebuilding of the fortifications they conducted in combination, although they were political opponents. But it was Aristides who guided the public policy in the matter of the defection of the Ionian states from the alliance with Sparta, seizing the opportunity afforded by the discredit brought upon the Lacedaemonians by the misconduct of Pausanias. It follows that it was he who arranged the tribute from the various allied states, which was first instituted 2 years after the battle of Salamis, in the archonship of Timosthenes, and it was he who took the oath of offensive and defensive alliance with the Ionians, on which occasion they cast the masses of iron into the sea. Chapter 24. After this, seeing the state growing in confidence and much wealth accumulated, he advised the people to lay hold of the leadership of the league, and to quit the country districts and settle in the city. He pointed out to them that all would be able to gain a living there, some by service in the army, others in the garrisons, others by taking a part in public affairs, and in this way they would secure the leadership. This advice was taken, and when the people had assumed the supreme control, they proceeded to treat their allies in a more imperious fashion, with the exception of the Chians, Lesbians, and Samians. These they maintained to protect their empire, leaving their constitutions untouched, and allowing them to retain whatever dominion they then possessed. They also secured an ample maintenance for the mass of the population, in the way which Aristides had pointed out to them. Out of the proceeds of the tributes and the taxes and the contributions of the allies, more than 20,000 persons were maintained. There were 6,000 jurymen, 1,600 bowmen, 1,200 knights, 500 members of the council, 500 guards of the dockyards, besides 50 guards in the city. There were some 700 magistrates at home, and some 700 abroad. Further, when they subsequently went to war, there were in addition 2,500 heavy armed troops, 20 guard ships, and other ships which collected the tributes, with crews amounting to 2,000 men, selected by lot, and besides these there were the persons maintained at the Prytaneum, and orphans, and jailers, since all these were supported by the state. Chapter 25. In this way the people earned their livelihood. The supremacy of the Areopagus lasted, however, for about 17 years after the Persian wars, although gradually declining. But as the strength of the masses increased, Ephialtes, son of Sophonides, a man with a reputation for incorruptibility, and possessing a high public character, who had become the leader of the people, made an attack upon that council. First of all, he brought about the ruin of many of its members by bringing actions against them with reference to their administration. Then, in the archonship of Conon, he stripped the council of all the acquired prerogatives from which it derived its guardianship of the constitution, and assigned some of them to the Council of 500, and others to the assembly and the law courts. In this revolution he was assisted by Themistocles, who was himself a member of the Areopagus, but was expecting to be tried before it on a charge of treasonable dealings with Persia. This made him anxious that it should be overthrown, and accordingly he warned Ephialtes that the council intended to arrest him, while at the same time he informed the Areopagites that he would reveal to them certain persons who were conspiring to subvert the constitution. He then conducted the representatives delegated by the council to the residence of Ephialtes, promising to show them the conspirators who assembled there, and proceeded to converse with them in an earnest manner. Ephialtes, seeing this, was seized with alarm, and took refuge in suppliant guise at the altar. Every one was astounded at the occurrence, and presently, when the council of 500 met, Ephialtes and Themistocles together proceeded to denounce the Areopagus to them. This they repeated in similar fashion in the assembly, until they succeeded in depriving it of its power. Not long afterwards, however, Ephialtes was assassinated by Aristodicus of Tanagra. In this way was the council of Areopagus deprived of its guardianship of the state. Chapter 26. After this revolution, the administration of the state became more and more lax in consequence of the eager rivalry of candidates for popular favour. During this period, the moderate party, as it happened, had no real chief, their leader being Simon, son of Miltiades, who was a comparatively young man, and had been late in entering public life, and at the same time the mass of the people suffered great losses by war. The soldiers for active service were selected at that time from the roll of citizens, and as the generals were men of no military experience, who owed their position solely to their family standing, it continually happened that some 2,000 or 3,000 of the troops perished on an expedition, and in this way the best men alike of the lower and the upper classes were exhausted. The result was that in most matters of administration less heed was paid to the laws than had formerly been the case. No alteration, however, was made in the method of election of the 9 archons, except that 5 years after the death of Ephialtes it was decided that the candidates to be submitted to the lot for that office might be selected from the Zeugidae as well as from the higher classes. The first archon from that class was Mnesothides. Up to this time all the archons had been taken from the Pentacosio Medimni and knights, while the Zeugidae were confined to the ordinary magistracies, save where an evasion of the law was overlooked. 4 years later, in the archonship of Lysicrates, the 30 local justices, as they were called, were re-established, and 2 years afterwards, in the archonship of Antidotus, in consequence of the great increase in the number of citizens, it was resolved on the motion of Pericles that no one should be admitted to the franchise who was not of citizen birth by both parents. Chapter 27. After this, Pericles assumed the position of popular leader, having first distinguished himself while still a young man by prosecuting Simon on the audit of his official accounts as general. Under his auspices the constitution became still more democratic. He took away some of the privileges of the Areopagus, and, above all, he turned the policy of the state in the direction of naval dominion, which caused the masses to acquire confidence in themselves, and consequently to take the conduct of affairs more and more into their own hands. Moreover, 48 years after the battle of Salamis, in the archonship of Pythodorus, the Peloponnesian War broke out, during which the populace was shut up in the city, and became accustomed to gain its livelihood by military service, and so, partly voluntarily and partly involuntarily, determined to assume the administration of the state itself. Pericles was also the first to institute pay for service in the law courts as a bid for popular favour to counterbalance the wealth of Cimon. The latter, having private possessions of royal splendour, not only performed the regular public services magnificently, but also maintained a large number of his fellow demesmen. Any member of the Dema of Lachiadae could go every day to Cimon's house, and there receive a reasonable provision, and his estate was guarded by no fences, so that any one who liked might help himself to the fruit from it. Pericles' private property was quite unequal to this magnificence, and accordingly he took the advice of Daimonides of Aea (who was commonly supposed to be the person who prompted Pericles in most of his measures, and was therefore subsequently ostracized), which was that, as he was beaten in the matter of private possessions, he should make presents to the people from their own property, and accordingly he instituted pay for the members of the juries. Some persons accuse him of thereby causing a deterioration in the character of the juries, since it was always the inferior people who were anxious to submit themselves for selection as jurors, rather than the men of better position. Moreover, bribery came into existence after this, the first person to introduce it being Anytus, after his command at Pylos. He was prosecuted by certain individuals on account of his loss of Pylos, but escaped by bribing the jury. Chapter 28. So long, however, as Pericles was leader of the people, things went tolerably well with the state. But when he was dead, there was a great change for the worse. Then for the first time did the people choose a leader who was of no reputation among men of good standing, whereas up to this time such men had always been found as leaders of the democracy. The first leader of the people in the very beginning of things was Solon, and the second was Pisistratus, both of them men of birth and position. After the overthrow of the tyrants there was Cleisthenes, a member of the house of the Alcmeonidae, and he had no rival opposed to him after the expulsion of the party of Isagoras. After this, Xanthippus was the leader of the people, and Miltiades of the upper class. Then came Themistocles and Aristides, and after them Ephialtes as leader of the people, and Cimon, son of Miltiades, of the wealthier class. Pericles followed as leader of the people, and Thucydides, who was connected by marriage with Cimon, of the opposition. After the death of Pericles, Nicias, who subsequently fell in Sicily, appeared as leader of the aristocracy, and Cleon, son of Cleanitos, as that of the people. The latter seems, more than any one else, to have been the cause of the corruption of the democracy by his wild undertakings, and he was the first to use unseemly shouting and coarse abuse on the Bema, and to harangue the people with his cloak girt up short about him, whereas all his predecessors had spoken decently and in order. These were succeeded by Thyromenes, son of Hagnon, as leader of the one party, and the lyre-maker, Cleophon, of the people. It was Cleophon who first granted the 2 obol donation for the theatrical performances, and for some time he continued to give it, but then Callicrates of Penia ousted him by promising to add a 3 obol to the sum. Both of these persons were subsequently condemned to death, for the people, even if they are deceived for a time, in the end generally come to detest those who have beguiled them into any unworthy action. After Cleophon, the popular leadership was occupied successively by the men who chose to talk the biggest and pander the most to the tastes of the majority, with their eyes fixed only on the interests of the moment. The best statesmen at Athens, after those of early times, seem to have been Nicias, Thucydides, and Thyramines. as to Nicias and Thucydides, nearly every one agrees that they were not merely men of birth and character, but also statesmen, and that they ruled the state with paternal care. On the merits of Thyramines opinion is divided, because it so happened that in his time public affairs were in a very stormy state. But those who give their opinion deliberately find him, not, as his critics falsely assert, overthrowing every kind of constitution, but supporting every kind so long as it did not transgress the laws, thus showing that he was able, as every good citizen should be, to live under any form of constitution, while he refused to countenance illegality, and was its constant enemy. Chapter 29. So long as the fortune of the war continued even, the Athenians preserved the democracy. But after the disaster in Sicily, when the Lacedaemonians had gained the upper hand through their alliance with the king of Persia, they were compelled to abolish the democracy and establish in its place the constitution of the 400. The speech recommending this course before the vote was made by Melobius, and the motion was drawn up by Pythodoros, son of Epizelos. But the real argument which persuaded the majority was the belief that the king of Persia was more likely to form an alliance with them if they should establish an oligarchy. The motion of Pythodoros was to the following effect. The popular assembly was to elect 20 persons over 40 years of age, who, in conjunction with the existing 10 members of the Committee of Public Safety, should take an oath that they would frame such proposals as they thought best for the state, and should then draw up proposals for the public safety. In addition, any other person was free to make any proposition he liked, so that the people might be able to choose the best of all the courses suggested to them. Cleitophon concurred with the motion of Pythodoros, but proposed that the committee should also investigate the ancient laws enacted by Cleisthenes when he created the democracy, in order that they might have these two before them before deciding on what was the best. His suggestion being that the constitution of Cleisthenes was not really democratical, but closely akin to that of Solon. When the committee was elected, their first proposal was that the Prytanes should be compelled to put to the vote any motion that was offered on behalf of the public safety. Next, they abolished all indictments for illegal proposals, all impeachments and public prosecutions, in order that every Athenian should be free to give his counsel on the situation if he chose. And they decreed that if any person imposed a fine on any other for his acts in this respect, or prosecuted him or summoned him before the courts, he should, on an information being laid against him, be summarily arrested and brought before the generals, who should deliver him to the 11 to be put to death. After these preliminary measures, they drew up the constitution in the following manner. The revenues of the state were not to be spent on any purpose except the war. All magistrates should serve without remuneration, so long as the war should last, except the 9 archons and the Prytanes, for the time being, who should each receive 3 obols a day. The general franchise was to be committed, so long as the war should last, to all Athenians who were most capable of serving the state personally or pecuniarily, to the number of not less than 5,000. This body was to have full powers, to the extent even of making treaties with whomsoever they willed, and 10 men over 40 years of age were to be elected out of each tribe to draw up the list of the 5,000, after taking an oath on a full and perfect sacrifice. Chapter 30. These were the proposals put forward by the committee, and when they had been ratified, the 5,000 elected from their own number 100 commissioners to draw up the constitution. They, on their appointment, drew up and produced the following propositions. There should be a council holding office for a year, consisting of men over 30 years of age, serving without pay. To this body should belong the generals, the 9 archons, the Amphictyonic register (Hieromnemon), the taxiarchs, the hipparchs, the phylarchs, the commanders of garrisons, the treasurers of Athena and the other gods, 10 in number, the Hellenic treasurers (Hellenotamiae), the treasurers of the other non-sacred moneys, to the number of 20, the 10 commissioners of sacrifices (Hieropoe), and the 10 superintendents of the mysteries. All these were to be appointed by the council from a larger number of selected candidates, chosen from its members for the time being. The other offices were all to be filled by lot, and not from the members of the council. The Hellenic treasurers who actually administered the funds were not to be members of the council. As regards the future, 4 councils were to be created of men of the age already mentioned, and one of these was to be chosen by lot to take office at once, while the others were to receive it in turn, in the order decided by the lot. For this purpose the 100 commissioners were to distribute themselves and all the rest as equally as possible into 4 parts, and cast lots for precedence, and the selected body should hold office for a year. They were to administer that office as seemed to them best, both with reference to the safe custody and due expenditure of the finances, and generally with all other matters to the best of their ability. If they desired to take a larger number of persons into council, each member might call in one assistant of his own choice, subject to the same qualification of age. The council was to sit once every 5 days, unless there was any special need for more frequent sittings. The casting of the lot for the council was to be held by the 9 archons. Votes on divisions were to be counted by 5 persons chosen by lot from the members of the council, and of these, one was to be selected by lot every day to act as president. These 5 persons were to cast lots for precedence between the parties wishing to appear before the council, giving the first place to sacred matters, the second to heralds, the third to embassies, and the fourth to all other subjects. But matters concerning the war might be dealt with on the motion of the generals, whenever there was need, without balloting. Any member of the council who did not enter the council house at the time named should be fined a drachma for each day, unless he was away on leave of absence from the council. Chapter 31. Such was the constitution which they drew up for the time to come. But for the immediate present they devised the following scheme. There should be a council of 400, as in the ancient constitution, 40 from each tribe, chosen out of candidates of more than 30 years of age, selected by the members of the tribes. This council should appoint the magistrates, and draw up the form of oath which they were to take, and in all that concerned the laws, in the examination of official accounts, and in other matters generally, it might act according to its discretion. It must, however, observe the laws that might be enacted with reference to the constitution of the state, and had no power to alter them, nor to pass others. The generals should be provisionally elected from the whole body of the 5,000, but so soon as the council came into existence, it was to hold an examination of military equipments, and thereon elect 10 persons, together with a secretary, and the persons thus elected should hold office during the coming year with full powers, and should have the right, whenever they desired it, of joining in the deliberations of the council. The 5,000 was also to elect a single hipparch and 10 phylarchs, but for the future the council was to elect these officers according to the regulations above laid down. Neither these offices, nor any others, except those of member of the council and of general, might be held more than once, either by the first occupants or by their successors. With reference to the future distribution of the 400 into the 4 successive sections, the 100 commissioners must divide them whenever the time comes for the citizens to join in the council along with the rest. End of chapter 31. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Chapter 32 of the Constitution of Athens by Aristotle. Translated by Sir Frederick Kenyon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Chapter 32. The 100 commissioners appointed by the 5,000 drew up the constitution as just stated, and after it had been ratified by the general voice, under the presidency of Aristomachus, the existing council, that of the year of Callias, was dissolved before it had completed its term of office. It was dissolved on the 14th day of the month Thargalion, and the 400 entered into office on the 21st, whereas the regular council, elected by lot, ought to have entered into office on the 14th of Scirophorion. Thus was the oligarchy established in the archonship of Callias, just about 100 years after the expulsion of the tyrants. The chief promoters of the revolution were Pisander, Antiphon, and Theramenes, all of them men of good birth, and with high reputations for ability and judgment. When, however, this constitution had been established, the 5,000 were only nominally selected, and the 400, together with the 10 officers on whom full powers had been conferred, occupied the council house and really administered the government. They began by sending ambassadors to the Lacedaemonians, proposing a cessation of the war on the terms of the status quo. But as the Lacedaemonians refused to listen to them unless they would also abandon their maritime empire, they broke off the negotiations. Chapter 33. For about 4 months the constitution of the 400 lasted, and Nasilikos held office as archon of their nomination for 2 months of the year of Theopompos, who was archon for the remaining 10. After the loss of the naval battle of Eretria, however, and the revolt of the whole of Euboea except Oreum, the indignation of the people was greater than at any of the earlier disasters, since they drew far more supplies at this time from Euboea than from Attica itself. Accordingly, they deposed the 400, and committed the management of affairs to the 5,000, who consisted of persons possessing a military equipment. At the same time they voted that pay should not be given for any public office. The persons chiefly responsible for the revolution were Aristocrates and Theramenes, who disapproved of the action of the 400 in retaining the direction of affairs entirely in their own hands, and referring nothing to the 5,000. The constitution of the state seems to have been admirable during this period, since it was a time of war, and the franchise was in the hands of those who possessed a military equipment. Chapter 34. The people, however, in a very short time, deprived the 5,000 of their monopoly of the franchise. Then, 6 years after the overthrow of the 400, in the archonship of Callias of Angeli, the battle of Arginosae took place, of which the results were, first, that the 10 generals who had gained the victory were all condemned by a single vote, owing to the people being led astray by persons who aroused their indignation, though, as a matter of fact, some of the generals had actually taken no part in the battle, and others were themselves picked up by other vessels. Secondly, when the Lacedaemonians proposed to evacuate Decelea and make peace on terms of the status quo, although some of the Athenians supported this proposal, the majority refused to listen to them. In this they were led astray by Cleophon, who appeared in the assembly drunk and wearing his breastplate, and prevented peace being made, declaring that he would never accept peace unless the Lacedaemonians abandoned their claims on all the cities allied with them. They mismanaged their opportunity then, and in a very short time they learnt their mistake. The next year, in the archonship of Alexius, they suffered the disaster of Aegospotami, the consequence of which was that Lysander became master of the city, and set up the 30 as its governors. He did so in the following manner. One of the terms of peace stipulated that the state should be governed according to the ancient constitution. Accordingly, the popular party tried to preserve the democracy, while that part of the upper class which belonged to the political clubs, together with the exiles who had returned since the peace, desired an oligarchy, and those who were not members of any club, though in other respects they held a position in the state inferior to none, were anxious to restore the ancient constitution. The latter class included Archinos, Anytos, Cleitophon, Formicios, and many others, but their most prominent leader was Theramenes. Lysander, however, threw his influence on the side of the oligarchical party, and the popular assembly was compelled by sheer intimidation to pass a vote establishing the oligarchy. The motion to this effect was proposed by Dracontides of Aphidna. Chapter 35. In this way were the 30 established in power in the archonship of Pythodorus. As soon, however, as they were masters of the city, they ignored all the resolutions which had been passed relating to the organization of the constitution, but appointed a council of 500, and the other magistrates, out of the 1,000 selected candidates, associated with themselves 10 archons in Piraeus, 11 superintendents of the prison, and 300 lash-bearers as attendants, and with the help of these they kept the city under their own control. At first, indeed, they behaved with moderation towards the citizens, and pretended to administer the state according to the ancient constitution. In pursuance of this policy, they took down from the hill of Areopagus the laws of Ephialtes and Archestratos relating to the Areopagite council. They also repealed such of the statutes of Solon as were obscure, and abolished the supreme power of the law courts. In this they claimed to be restoring the constitution and freeing it from obscurities, as for instance by making the testator free once for all to leave his property as he pleased, and abolishing the existing limitations in cases of insanity, old age, and undue female influence, in order that no opening might be left for professional accusers. In other matters also their conduct was similar. At first, then, they acted on these lines, and they destroyed the professional accusers, and those mischievous and evil-minded persons who, to the great detriment of the democracy, had attached themselves to it in order to curry favour with it. With all of this the city was much pleased, and thought that the 30 were doing it with the best of motives. But so soon as they had got a firmer hold on the city, they spared no class of citizens, but put to death any persons who were eminent for wealth, or birth, or character. Herein they aimed at removing all whom they had reason to fear, and they also wished to lay hands on their possessions, and in a short time they put to death not less than 1,500 persons. Chapter 36. Theramenes, however, seeing the city thus falling into ruin, was displeased with their proceedings, and counselled them to cease such unprincipled conduct, and let the better classes have a share in the government. At first they opposed his suggestions, but when his proposals came to be known abroad, and the masses began to be on friendly terms with him, they were seized with alarm lest he should make himself a popular leader and destroy their despotic power. Accordingly, they drew up a list of 3,000 citizens, to whom they proposed to give a share in the constitution. Theramenes, however, criticized this scheme also, first on the ground that, while proposing to give all respectable citizens a share in the constitution, they were actually giving it only to 3,000 persons, as though all merit were confined within that number; and secondly, because they were doing two inconsistent things, since they made the government rest on the basis of force, and yet made the governors inferior in strength to the governed. However, they took no notice of his criticisms, and for a long time put off the publication of the list of the 3,000, and kept to themselves the names of those who had been placed upon it, and whenever they did decide to publish it, they proceeded to strike out some of those who had been included in it, and insert others from outside. Chapter 37. Now, when winter had set in, Thrasybulus and the exiles occupied Phyle, and the force which the 30 led out to attack them met with a reverse. Thereupon the 30 decided to disarm the bulk of the population, and to get rid of Theramenes, which they did in the following way. They introduced 2 laws into the council, which they commanded it to pass. The first of them gave the 30 absolute power to put to death any citizen who was not included in the list of the 3000, while the second disqualified all persons from participation in the franchise who should have assisted in the demolition of the fort of Etonia, or have acted in any way against the 400, or against those who had organized the previous oligarchy. Theramenes had done both, and accordingly, when these laws were ratified, he became excluded from the franchise, and the 30 had full power to put him to death. Theramenes having been thus removed, they disarmed all the people except the 3000, and in every respect showed a great advance in cruelty and crime. They also sent ambassadors to Lacedaemon to blacken the character of Theramenes, and to ask for help, and the Lacedaemonians, in answer to their appeal, sent Calybios as Harmost, with about 700 troops, who came and occupied the Acropolis. Chapter 38. These events were followed by the occupation of Munichia by the exiles from Phyle, and their victory over the 30 and their partisans. After the fight, the party of the city retreated, and next day they held a meeting in the marketplace, and deposed the 30, and elected 10 citizens, on whom they conferred full powers to bring the war to a termination. When, however, the 10 had taken over the government, they did nothing towards the object for which they were elected, but sent envoys to Lacedaemon to ask for help and to borrow money. Further, finding that those who possessed the franchise were displeased at their proceedings, they were afraid lest they should be deposed, and consequently, in order to strike terror into them (in which design they succeeded), they arrested Demaratus, one of the most eminent citizens, and put him to death. This gave them a firm hold on the government, and they also had the support of Calybios and his Peloponnesians, together with several of the knights, for some of the members of this class were the most zealous among the citizens to prevent the return of the exiles from Phyle. When, however, the party in Piraeus and Munichia began to gain the upper hand in the war, through the defection of the whole people to them, the party in the city deposed the original 10, and elected another 10, consisting of the men who possessed the highest character. Under their administration, and with their active and zealous cooperation, the treaty of reconciliation was made, and the democracy returned to the city. The most prominent members of this board were Rhinon of Paeania, and Philos of Acardus, who, even before the arrival of Pausanias, opened negotiations with the party in Piraeus, and, after his arrival, seconded his efforts to bring about the return of the exiles. For it was Pausanias, the king of the Lacedaemonians, who brought the peace and reconciliation to a fulfillment, in conjunction with the 10 commissioners of arbitration, who arrived later from Lacedaemon, chiefly at his earnest request. Rhinon and his colleagues received a vote of thanks for the good will shown by them to the democracy, and, though they received their charge under an oligarchy, and handed in their accounts under a democracy, no one, either of the party that had stayed in the city, or of the exiles that had returned from the Piraeus, brought any complaint against them. On the contrary, Rhinon was immediately elected general on account of his conduct in this office. Chapter 39. The following were the terms on which the reconciliation was effected in the archonship of Eucleides. All persons who, having remained in the city during the troubles, were now anxious to leave it, were to be free to settle at Eleusis, retaining their civil rights, and possessing full and independent powers of self-government, and with the free enjoyment of their own personal property. The temple at Eleusis should be common ground for both parties, and should be under the superintendence of the Cerices and the Eumolpidae, according to primitive custom. The settlers at Eleusis should not be allowed to enter Athens, nor the people of Athens to enter Eleusis, except at the season of the mysteries, when both parties should be free from these restrictions. The secessionists should pay their share to the fund for the common defence out of their revenues, just like all the other Athenians. If any of the seceding party wished to take a house in Eleusis, the people would help them to obtain the consent of the owner; but if they could not come to terms, they should appoint 3 valuers on either side, and the owner should receive whatever price they should appoint. Of the inhabitants of Eleusis, those whom the secessionists wished to remain should be allowed to do so. The list of those who desired to secede should be made up within 7 days after the taking of the oaths in the case of persons already in the country, and their actual departure should take place within 20 days. Persons at present out of the country should have the same terms allowed to them after their return. No one who settled at Eleusis should be capable of holding any office in Athens until he should again be inscribed on the roll as resident in the city. Trials for homicide, including all cases in which one party had either killed or wounded another, should be conducted according to the primitive fashion. There should be an universal amnesty concerning past events towards all persons, except the 30, the 10, the 11, and the magistrates in Piraeus, and these too should be included if they should submit their accounts in the usual way. Such accounts should be given by the magistrates in Piraeus before a court of citizens rated in Piraeus, and by the magistrates in the city before a court of those rated in the city. On these terms, those who wished to do so might secede. Each party was to repay separately the money which it had borrowed for the war. Chapter 40. When the reconciliation had taken place on these terms, those who had fought on the side of the 30 felt considerable apprehensions, and a large number intended to secede. But as they put off entering their names till the last moment, as people will do, Archinos, observing their numbers, and being anxious to retain them as citizens, cut off the remaining days during which the list should have remained open, and in this way many persons were compelled to remain, though they were very unwilling to do so until they recovered confidence. This is one point in which Archinos appears to have acted in a most statesmanlike manner, and another was his prosecution of Thrasybulus on the charge of illegality, for a motion by which he proposed to confer the franchise on all who had taken part in the return from Piraeus, although some of them were notoriously slaves. And yet a third such action was when one of the returned exiles began to violate the amnesty, whereupon Archinos haled him to the council, and persuaded them to execute him without trial, telling them that now they would have to show whether they wished to preserve the democracy and abide by the oaths they had taken. For if they let this man escape, they would encourage others to imitate him, while if they executed him, they would make an example for all to learn by. And this was exactly what happened; for after this man had been put to death, no one ever again broke the amnesty. On the contrary, the Athenians seem, both in public and in private, to have behaved in the most unprecedentedly admirable and public-spirited way with reference to the preceding troubles. Not only did they blot out all memory of former offences, but they even repaid to the Lacedaemonians out of the public purse the money which the 30 had borrowed for the war, although the treaty required each party, the party of the city and the party of Piraeus to pay its own debts separately. This they did because they thought it was a necessary first step in the direction of restoring harmony. But in other states, so far from the democratic parties making advances from their own possessions, they rather make a general redistribution of the land. A further reconciliation was made with the secessionists at Eleusis 2 years after the secession, in the archonship of Xenaenetos. Chapter 41. This, however, took place at a later date. At the time of which we are speaking, the people, having secured the control of the state, established the constitution which exists at the present day. Pythodorus was archon at the time, but the democracy seems to have assumed the supreme power with perfect justice, since it had effected its own return by its own exertions. This was the 11th change which had taken place in the constitution of Athens. First of all came the original establishment by Ion, and those who assisted him in forming the settlement, when the people was first divided into the 4 tribes, and the tribe kings were created. Next, and the first organization of the constitution following this, was that which took place in the reign of Theseus, consisting in a slight deviation from absolute monarchy. After this came the constitution formed under Draco, when the first code of laws was drawn up. The third was that which followed the civil war in the time of Solon. From this the democracy took its rise. The fourth was the tyranny of Pisistratus. The fifth, the constitution of Cleisthenes, after the overthrow of the tyrants of a more democratic character than that of Solon. The sixth was that which followed on the Persian wars, when the council of Areopagus had the direction of the state. The seventh, succeeding this, was the constitution which Aristides sketched out, and which Ephialtes brought to completion by overthrowing the Areopagite council. Under this, the nation, misled by the demagogues, made the most serious mistakes on account of its maritime empire. The eighth was the establishment of the 400, followed by the ninth, the restored democracy. The 10th was the tyranny of the 30 and the 10. The 11th was that which followed the return from Phyle and Piraeus, and this has continued from that day to this, with continual accretions of power to the masses. The democracy has made itself master of everything, and administers everything by its votes in the assembly, and by the law courts in which it holds the supreme power. Even the jurisdiction of the council has passed into the hands of the people at large, and this appears to be a judicious change, since small bodies are more open to corruption, whether by actual money or by influence, than large ones. At first they refused to allow payment for attendance at the assembly, but the result was that people did not attend. Consequently, after the Prytanes had tried many devices in vain in order to induce the populace to come and ratify the votes, Agyros, in the first instance, made a provision of 1 obol a day, which Heraclides of Clazomenae, nicknamed the king, increased to 2 obols, and Agyros again to 3. End of chapter 41. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Chapter 42 of the Constitution of Athens by Aristotle, translated by Sir Frederick Kenyon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Chapter 42. The present state of the Constitution is as follows. The franchise is open to all who are of citizen birth by both parents. They are enrolled among the demesmen at the age of 18. On the occasion of their enrollment, the demesmen give their votes on oath, first as to whether they appear to be of the age prescribed by the law. If not, they are dismissed back into the ranks of the boys. And secondly, as to whether the candidate is free-born, and of such parentage as the laws require. Then, if they decide that he is not a free man, he appeals to the law courts, and the demesmen appoint 5 of their own number to act as accusers. And if the court decides that he has no right to be enrolled, he is sold by the state as a slave. But if he wins his case, he has a right to be enrolled among the demesmen without further question. After this, the council examines those who have been enrolled, and if it comes to the conclusion that any of them is less than 18 years of age, it fines the demesmen who enrolled him. When the youths, Ephebi, have passed this examination, their fathers meet by their tribes, and appoint on oath 3 of their fellow tribesmen over 40 years of age, who, in their opinion, are the best and most suitable persons to have charge of the youths. And of these the assembly elects 1 from each tribe as guardian, together with a director, chosen from the general body of Athenians to control the whole. These persons take charge of the youths, and, first of all, they make the circuit of the temples. Then they proceed to Piraeus, and some of them garrison Munichia, and some the south shore. The assembly also elects 2 trainers with subordinate instructors, who teach them to fight in heavy armor, to use the bow and javelin, and to discharge a catapult. The guardians receive from the state a drachma apiece for their keep, and the youths 4 obols apiece. Each guardian receives the allowance for all the members of his tribe, and buys the necessary provisions for the common stock. They mess together by tribes, and generally superintends everything. In this way they spend the first year. The next year, when the assembly is held in the theatre, after giving a public display of their military evolutions, they receive a shield and spear from the state, after which they patrol the country, and spend their time in the forts. For these 2 years they are on garrison duty, and wear the military cloak, and during this time they are exempt from all taxes. They also can neither bring an action at law, nor have one brought against them, in order that they may have no excuse for requiring leave of absence, though exception is made in cases of actions concerning inheritances and wards of state, or of any sacrificial ceremony connected with the family. When the 2 years have elapsed, they at once take their position among the other citizens. Such is the manner of the enrollment of the citizens, and the training of the youths. Chapter 43. All the magistrates that are concerned with the ordinary routine of administration are elected by lot, except the military treasurer, the commissioners of the Theoric Fund, and the superintendent of springs. These are elected by vote, and the magistrates thus elected hold office from one Panathenaic festival to another. All military officers are also elected by vote. The council of 500 is elected by lot, 50 from each tribe. Each tribe holds the office of Prytanes in turn, the order being determined by lot. The first 4 serve for 36 days each, the last 6 for 35, since the reckoning is by lunar years. The Prytanes, for the time being, in the first place, mess together in the Tholas, and receive a sum of money from the state for their maintenance, and, secondly, they convene the meetings of the council and the assembly. The council they convene every day, unless it is a holiday, the assembly 4 times in each Prytany. It is also their duty to draw up the programme of the matters with which the council has to deal, and to decide what subjects are to be dealt with on each particular day, and where it is to sit. They also draw up the programme for the meetings of the assembly. One of these in each Prytany is called the Sovereign Assembly. In this the people have to ratify the continuance of the magistrates in office, if they are performing their duties properly, and to consider the supply of corn and the defence of the country. On this day, too, impeachments are introduced by those who wish to do so. The lists of property confiscated by the state are read, and also applications for inheritances and wards of state, so that nothing may pass without the cognizance of any person concerned. In the 6th Prytany, in addition to the business already stated, the question is also put to the vote whether it is desirable to hold a vote of ostracism or not, and complaints against professional accusers, whether Athenian or aliens domiciled in Athens, are received, to the number of not more than 3 of either class, together with cases in which an individual has made some promise to the people, and has not performed it. Another assembly in each Prytany is assigned to suppliants, and at this meeting any one is free, on depositing the suppliant's olive branch, to speak to the people concerning any matter, public or private. The 2 remaining meetings are devoted to all other subjects, and the laws require them to deal with 3 questions connected with religion, 3 connected with heralds and embassies, and 3 on secular subjects. Sometimes questions are brought forward without a preliminary vote of the assembly, to take them into consideration. Heralds and envoys, too, appear first before the Prytanes, and the bearers of dispatches also deliver them to the same officials. Chapter 44. There is a single president of the Prytanes elected by lot, who presides for a night and a day. He may not hold the office for more than that time, nor may the same individual hold it twice. He keeps the keys of the sanctuaries in which the treasures and public records of the state are preserved, and also the public seal, and he is bound to remain in the Tholos, together with 1/3 of the Prytanes named by himself. Whenever the Prytanes convene a meeting of the council or assembly, he appoints by lot 9 prodri, 1 from each tribe, except that which holds the office of Prytanes for the time being, and out of these 9 he similarly appoints 1 as president, and hands over the programme for the meeting to them. They take it and see to the preservation of order, and put forward the various subjects which are to be considered, decide the results of the votings, and direct the proceedings generally. They also have power to dismiss the meeting. No one may act as president more than once in the year, but he may be a prodros once in each Prytany. Elections to the offices of general and hipparch and all other military posts are held in the assembly, in such manner as the people decide, and they are held after the 6th Prytany by the first board of Prytanes, in whose term of office the omens are favorable. There has, however, to be a preliminary consideration by the council in this case also. Chapter 45. In former times the council had full powers to inflict fines, and imprisonment, and death, and it was when it had dragged off Lysimachus to the executioner, and he was sitting in the immediate expectation of death, that Eumelades of Alopaci deprived it of its powers, maintaining that no citizen ought to be put to death, except after a hearing by a court of law. Accordingly, a trial was held in a law court, and Lysimachus was acquitted, receiving henceforth the nickname of the man from the drumhead. And the people deprived the council thenceforward of the power to inflict death, or imprisonment, or fine, passing a law that if the council condemn any person for an offence, or inflict a fine, the Thesmothetae shall bring the sentence or fine before the law court, and the decision of the jurors shall be the final judgment in the matter. The council passes judgment on nearly all magistrates, especially those who have the control of money. Its judgment, however, is not final, but is subject to an appeal to the law courts. Private individuals also may impeach any magistrate they please, for not obeying the laws, but here too there is an appeal to the law courts if the council declare the charge proved. The council also examines those who are to be its members for the ensuing year, and also the 9 archons. Formerly the council had full power to reject candidates for office as unsuitable, but now these 2 have an appeal to the law courts. In all these matters, therefore, the council has no final jurisdiction. It has, however, a preliminary consideration of all matters brought before the assembly, and the assembly cannot vote on any question unless it has first been considered by the council and placed on the programme by the Prytanes. Since a person who carries a motion in the assembly is liable to an action for illegal proposal on these grounds. Chapter 46. The council also superintends the triremes that are already in existence, with their tackle and sheds, and builds new triremes, or quadriremes, whichever the assembly votes, with tackle and sheds to match. The assembly appoints master builders for the ships by vote, and if they do not hand them over completed to the next council, the old council cannot receive the customary donation, that being normally given to it during its successor's term of office. For the building of the triremes it appoints 10 shipbuilders chosen out of the whole body of the people. The council also inspects all public buildings, and if it is of opinion that the state is being defrauded, it reports the culprit to the assembly, and, after itself condemning him, hands him over to the law courts. Chapter 47. The council also cooperates with the other magistrates in most of their duties. First, there are the treasurers of Athena, 10 in number, elected by lot, 1 from each tribe. According to the law of Solon, which is still in force, they must be Pentacosio Medimni. But, in point of fact, the person on whom the lot falls holds the office even though he be quite a poor man. These officers take over charge of the statue of Athena, the figures of victory, and all the other ornaments of the temple, together with the money, in the presence of the council. Then there are the commissioners for public contracts, Polite, 10 in number, 1 elected by lot from each tribe. These officers farm out the public contracts, and lease the mines, and in conjunction with the military treasurer and the commissioners of the Theoric Fund, confirm the farming out of taxes, in the presence of the council, to the persons whom the latter appoints. Also the mines which are let out by the state, including both the workable ones which are let for 3 years, and those which are let under special agreements for 3 years. They also sell, in the presence of the council, the property of those who have gone into exile from a sentence of the Areopagus, and of state debtors, and the 9 archons ratify the contracts. They also hand over to the council lists of the taxes which are farmed out for the year, entering on whitened tablets the name of the lessee and the amount paid. They make separate lists, first of those who have to pay their instalments in each prytany on 10 several tablets, next of those who pay thrice in the year, with a separate tablet for each instalment, and finally of those who pay in the 9th prytany. They also draw up a list of farms and dwellings which have been confiscated and sold, and place it in the law court, for these too come within their province. In the case of dwellings the value must be paid up in 5 years, and in that of farms in 10. The instalments are paid in the 9th prytany. Further, the king Archon brings before the council the leases of the sacred enclosures, written on whitened tablets. These too are leased for 10 years, and the instalments are paid in the 9th prytany. Consequently, it is in this prytany that the greatest amount of money is collected. The tablets containing the lists of the instalments are carried into the council, and the public clerk takes charge of them. Whenever a payment of instalments is to be made, he takes from the pigeonholes the precise list of the sums which are to be paid and struck off on that day, and delivers it to the receivers general. The rest are kept apart in order that no sum may be struck off before it is paid. Chapter 48. There are 10 receivers general, apodectae, elected by lot, 1 from each tribe. These officers receive the tablets, and strike off the instalments as they are paid, in the presence of the council in the council chamber, and give the tablets back to the public clerk. If any one fails to pay his instalment, a note is made of it from this record, and he is bound to pay double the amount of the deficiency, or in default to be imprisoned. The council has full power by the laws to exact these payments and to inflict this imprisonment. They receive the money, therefore, on one day, and portion it out among the magistrates, and on the next day they bring up the report of the apportionment, written on a wooden notice board, and read it out in the council chamber, after which they ask publicly in the council whether any one knows of any malpractice in reference to the apportionment on the part of either a magistrate or a private individual, and if any one is charged with malpractice, they put the question to the vote. The council also elects 10 auditors, logiste, by lot, from its own members to audit the accounts of the magistrates for each prytany. They also elect 1 examiner of accounts, euthunus, by lot, from each tribe, with 2 assessors, paredri, for each examiner, whose duty it is to sit on the days of the tribal meetings, each opposite the statue of the eponymous hero of his tribe. And if any one wishes to prefer a charge, on either public or private grounds, against any magistrate who has passed his audit before the law courts, within 3 days of his having so passed, he enters on a whitened tablet his own name, and that of the magistrate prosecuted, together with the malpractice that is alleged against him. He also appends his claim for a penalty of such amount as seems to him fitting, and gives in the record to the examiner. The latter takes it and hears the charge, and if he considers it proved, he hands it over, if a private case, to the local justices who introduce cases for the tribe concerned, while if a public case, he enters it on the register of the Thesmothetae. Then, if the Thesmothetae accept it, they bring the accounts of this magistrate once more before the law court, and the decision of the jury stands as the final judgment. Chapter 49. The council also examines the horses belonging to the state. If a man who has a good horse is found to keep it in bad condition, he is mulcted in his allowance of corn, while those which cannot keep up, or which are too unmanageable to keep their place in the rank, it brands with a wheel on the jaw, and the horse so marked is disqualified for service. It also examines those who appear to be fit for service as scouts, and any one whom it rejects is deprived of his horse. It also examines the infantry who serve among the cavalry, and any one whom it rejects ceases to receive his pay. The roll of the cavalry is drawn up by the commissioners of enrollment, cataloges, 10 in number, elected by the assembly by open vote. They hand over to the hipparchs and phylarchs the list of those whom they have enrolled, and these officers take it and bring it up before the council, and there open the tablet in which the names of the cavalry are sealed up. If any of those who have been on the roll previously make affidavit that they are physically incapable of cavalry service, they strike them out. Then they call up the persons newly enrolled, and if any one makes affidavit that he is either physically or pecuniarily incapable of cavalry service, they dismiss him. But if no such affidavit is made, the council votes whether the individual in question is suitable for the purpose or not. If they vote in the affirmative, his name is entered on the tablet. If not, he is dismissed with the others. Formerly the council used to decide on the plans for public buildings, and the contract for making the robe of Athena. But now this work is done by a jury in the law courts appointed by lot, since the council was considered to have shown favoritism in its decisions. The council also has a share in the superintendence of the manufacture of the images of victory, and the prizes at the Panathenaic festival, in conjunction with the military treasurer. The council also examines infirm paupers, for there is a law which enacts that persons possessing less than 3 minas, who are so crippled as not to be able to do any work, are, after examination by the council, to receive 2 obols a day from the state for their support. A treasurer is appointed by lot to attend to them. The council also, speaking broadly, cooperates in most of the duties of all the other magistrates, and This ends the list of the functions of that body. Chapter 50. There are 10 commissioners for repairs of temples elected by lot, who receive a sum of 30 minas from the receivers general, and therewith carry out the most necessary repairs in the temples. There are also 10 city commissioners, Astynomi, of whom 5 hold office in Piraeus, and 5 in the city. Their duty is to see that female flute and harp and lute players are not hired at more than 2 drachmas, and if more than one person is anxious to hire the same girl, they cast lots and hire her out to the person to whom the lot falls. They also provide that no collector of sewage shall shoot any of his sewage within 10 stadia of the walls. They prevent people from blocking up the streets by building or stretching barriers across them, or making drain pipes in mid-air with a discharge into the street, or having doors which open outwards. They also remove the corpses of those who die in the streets, for which purpose they have a body of state slaves assigned to them. Chapter 51. Market commissioners, agoranomoi, are elected by lot, 5 for Piraeus, 5 for the city. The duty assigned to them by law is to see that all articles offered for sale in the market are pure and unadulterated. Commissioners of weights and measures, metronomi, are elected by lot, 5 for the city, and 5 for Piraeus. They see that sellers use fair weights and measures. Formerly there were 5 corn commissioners, Pseudophilices, elected by lot, for Piraeus, and 5 for the city, but now there are 20 for the city, and 15 for Piraeus. Their duties are, first, to see that the unprepared corn in the market is offered for sale at reasonable prices, and secondly to see that the millers sell barley meal at a price proportionate to that of barley, and that the bakers sell their loaves at a price proportionate to that of wheat, and of such weight as the commissioners may appoint, for the law requires them to fix the standard weight. There are 10 superintendents of the mart, elected by lot, whose duty is to superintend the mart, and to compel merchants to bring up into the city 2/3 of the corn which is brought by sea to the corn mart. Chapter 52. The 11 also are appointed by lot to take care of those who are in the state jail. Thieves, kidnappers, and pickpockets are brought to them, and if they plead guilty they are executed, but if they deny their crime, the 11 bring the case before the law courts. If the prisoners are acquitted, they release them, but if not, they then execute them. They also bring up before the law courts the list of farms and houses claimed as state property, and if it is decided that they are so, they deliver them to the commissioners for public contracts. The 11 also bring up informations laid against magistrates alleged to be disqualified. This function comes within their province, but some such cases are brought up by the Thesmothetae. There are also 5 introducers of cases, isagoges, 1 for each pair of tribes, who bring up the monthly cases to the law courts. Monthly cases are these: refusal to pay up a dowry where a party is bound to do so; refusal to pay interest on money borrowed at 12%, or where a man, desirous of setting up business in the market, has borrowed from another man capital to start with; also cases of slander, cases arising out of friendly loans or partnerships, and cases concerned with slaves, cattle, the office of trierarch, or with banks. These are brought up as monthly cases, and are introduced by these officers. But the receivers general perform the same function in cases for or against the farmers of taxes. Those in which the sum concerned is not more than 10 drachmas they can decide summarily, but all above that amount they bring into the law courts as monthly cases. Chapter 53. 40 persons are also elected by lot, 4 from each tribe, before whom suitors bring all other cases. Formerly they were 30 in number, and they went on circuit through the demes to hear causes, but after the oligarchy of the 30 they were increased to 40. They have full powers to deal with cases in which the amount at issue does not exceed 10 drachmas, but anything beyond that value they hand over to the arbitrators. The arbitrators take up the case, and if they cannot bring the parties to an agreement, they give a decision. If their decision satisfies both parties, and they abide by it, the case is at an end. But if either of the parties appeals to the law courts, the arbitrators enclose the evidence, the pleadings, and the laws quoted in the case in 2 urns, those of the plaintiff in the one, and those of the defendant in the other. These they seal up, and having attached to them the decision of the arbitrator, written out on a tablet, hand them over to the 4 justices whose function it is to introduce cases on behalf of the tribe of the defendant. These officers take them and bring up the case before the law court to a jury of 201 members in cases up to the value of 1,000 drachmas, or to one of 401 in cases above that value. No laws or pleadings or evidence may be used except those which were adduced before the arbitrator, and which have been enclosed in the urns. The arbitrators are persons in the 60th year of their age, as is clear from the archons and the eponymi. There are 2 classes of eponymi, the 10 who give their names to the tribes, and the 42 of the years of service. The names of the youths, on being enrolled among the citizens, were formerly inscribed upon whitened tablets, and the names were appended of the archon in whose year they were enrolled, and of the eponymous, who had been in course in the preceding year. At the present day they are written on a bronze pillar, which stands in front of the council chamber, near the eponymi of the tribes. Then the 40 take the last of the eponymi of the years of service, and assign the arbitrations to the persons belonging to that year, casting lots to determine which arbitrations each shall undertake. And every one is compelled to carry through the arbitrations which the lot assigns to him. The law enacts that anyone who does not serve as arbitrator when he has arrived at the necessary age shall lose his civil rights unless he happens to be holding some other office during that year, or to be out of the country. These are the only persons who escape the duty. Anyone who suffers injustice at the hands of the arbitrator may appeal to the whole board of arbitrators, and if they find the magistrate guilty, the law enacts that he shall lose his civil rights. The persons thus condemned have, however, in their turn an appeal. The eponymi are also used in reference to military expeditions. When the men of military age are dispatched on service, a notice is put up stating that the men from such and such an archon and eponymous to such and such another archon and eponymous are to go on the expedition. Chapter 54. The following magistrates also are elected by lot: 10 commissioners of roads, hadopoe, who, with an assigned body of public slaves, are required to keep the roads in order, and 10 auditors, with 10 assistants, to whom all persons who have held any office must give in their accounts. These are the only officers who audit the accounts of those who are subject to examination, and who bring them up for examination before the law courts. If they detect any magistrate in embezzlement, the jury condemn him on that charge, and he is obliged to repay 10-fold the sum he is declared to have misappropriated. If they charge a magistrate with accepting bribes, and the jury convict him, they fine him for corruption, and this sum too is repaid 10-fold. Or if they convict him of unfair dealing, he is fined on that charge, and the sum assessed is paid without increase, if payment is made before the 9th prytany, but otherwise it is doubled. A 10-fold fine is not doubled, however. The clerk of the prytany, as he is called, is also elected by lot. He has the charge of all public documents, and keeps the resolutions which are passed by the assembly, and checks all other official papers, and attends at the sessions of the council. Formerly he was elected by open vote, and the most distinguished and trustworthy persons were elected to the post, as is known from the fact that the name of this officer is appended on the pillars recording treaties of alliance and grants of consulship and citizenship. Now, however, he is elected by lot. There is in addition a clerk of the laws elected by lot, who attends at the sessions of the council, and he too checks the transcript of all the laws. The assembly also elects by open vote a clerk to read documents to it, and to the council, but he has no other duty except that of reading aloud. The assembly also elects by lot 10 commissioners of public worship, hieropoe, known as the commissioners for sacrifices, who offer the sacrifices appointed by oracle, and, in conjunction with the seers, take the auspices whenever there is occasion. It also elects by lot 10 others, known as annual commissioners, who offer certain sacrifices, and administer all the quadriennial festivals except the Panathenaea. There are the following quadriennial festivals. First, that of Delos, where there is also a sexennial festival. Secondly, the Brauronia. Thirdly, the Heraclea. Fourthly, the Eleusinia. And fifthly, the Panathenaea. And no 2 of these are celebrated in the same place. To these the Hephaestia has now been added in the archonship of Caiphesiphon. An archon is also elected by lot for Salamis, and a demarch for Piraeus. These officers celebrate the Dionysia in these 2 places, and appoint Charigi. In Salamis, moreover, the name of the archon is publicly recorded. End of chapter 54. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Chapter 55 of the Constitution of Athens by Aristotle, translated by Sir Frederick Kenyon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Chapter 55. All the foregoing magistrates are elected by lot, and their duties are those which have been stated. To pass on to the 9 archons, as they are called, the manner of their appointment from the earliest times has been described already. At the present day, 6 Thesmothetae are elected by lot, together with their clerk, and in addition to these, an archon, a king, and a polemarch. 1 is elected from each tribe. They are examined first of all by the council of 500, with the exception of the clerk. The latter is examined only in the law court, like other magistrates, for all magistrates, whether elected by lot or by open vote, are examined before entering on their offices. But the 9 archons are examined both in the council and again in the law court. Formerly, no one could hold the office if the council rejected him, but now there is an appeal to the law court, which is the final authority in the matter of the examination. When they are examined, they are asked, first, who is your father, and of what deme? Who is your father's father? Who is your mother? Who is your mother's father, and of what deme? Then the candidate is asked whether he possesses an ancestral Apollo and a household Zeus, and where their sanctuaries are. Next, if he possesses a family tomb, and where. Then, if he treats his parents well, and pays his taxes, and has served on the required military expeditions. When the examiner has put these questions, he proceeds, call the witnesses to these facts. And when the candidate has produced his witnesses, he next asks, does anyone wish to make any accusation against this man? If an accuser appears, he gives the parties an opportunity of making their accusation and defense, and then puts it to the council to pass the candidate or not, and to the law court to give the final vote. If no one wishes to make an accusation, he proceeds at once to the vote. Formerly, a single individual gave the vote, but now all the members are obliged to vote on the candidates, so that if any unprincipled candidate has managed to get rid of his accusers, it may still be possible for him to be disqualified before the law court. When the examination has been thus completed, they proceed to the stone on which are the pieces of the victims, and on which the arbitrators take oath before declaring their decisions, and witnesses swear to their testimony. On this stone the archons stand, and swear to execute their office uprightly, and according to the laws, and not to receive presents in respect of the performance of their duties, or, if they do, to dedicate a golden statue. When they have taken this oath, they proceed to the Acropolis, and there they repeat it. After this they enter upon their office. Chapter 56. The Archon, the king, and the Polemarch have each 2 assessors nominated by themselves. These officers are examined in the law court before they begin to act, and give in accounts on each occasion of their acting. As soon as the Archon enters office, he begins by issuing a proclamation that whatever any one possessed before he entered into office, that he shall possess and hold until the end of his term. Next, he assigns Choregi to the tragic poets, choosing 3 of the richest persons out of the whole body of Athenians. Formerly, he used also to assign 5 Choregi to the comic poets, but now the tribes provide the Choregi for this purpose. Then he receives the Choregi who have been appointed by the tribes for the men's and boys' choruses, and the comic poets at the Dionysia, and for the men's and boys' choruses at the Thargelia. At the Dionysia there is a chorus for each tribe, but at the Thargelia 1 between 2 tribes, each tribe bearing its share in providing it. He transacts the exchanges of properties, and reports any excuses that are tendered. If any one says that he has already borne this burden, or that he is exempt because he has borne a similar burden, and the period of his exemption has not yet expired, or that he is not of the required age, since the choregus of a boy's chorus must be over 40 years of age. He also appoints Choregi for the festival at Delos, and chiefs of the mission for the 30-oar boat which conveys the youths thither. He also superintends sacred processions, both that in honor of Asclepius, when the initiated keep house, and that of the great Dionysia, the latter in conjunction with the superintendence of that festival. These officers, 10 in number, were formerly elected by open vote in the assembly, and used to provide for the expenses of the procession out of their private means. But now one is elected by lot from each tribe, and the state contributes 100 minas for the expenses. The Archon also superintends the procession at the Thargelia, and that in honor of Zeus the Saviour. He also manages the contests at the Dionysia and the Thargelia. These, then, are the festivals which he superintends. The suits and indictments which come before him, and which he, after a preliminary inquiry, brings up before the law courts, are as follows. Injury to parents. For bringing these accusations, the prosecutor cannot suffer any penalty. Injury to orphans. These actions lie against their guardians. Injury to a ward of state. These lie against their guardians or their husbands. Injury to an orphan's estate. These 2 lie against the guardians. Mental derangement, where a party charges another with destroying his own property through unsoundness of mind. For appointment of liquidators, where a party refuses to divide property in which others have a share. For constituting a wardship. For determining between rival claims to a wardship. For granting inspection of property to which another party lays claim, and for determining disputes as to inheritances and wards of state. The Archon also has the care of orphans and wards of state, and of women who, on the death of their husbands, declare themselves to be with child, and he has power to inflict a fine on those who offend against the persons under his charge, or to bring the case before the law courts. He also leases out the houses of orphans and wards of state until they reach the age of 14, and takes mortgages on them. And if the guardians fail to provide the necessary food for the children under their charge, he exacts it from them. Such are the duties of the Archon. Chapter 57. The king, in the first place, superintends the mysteries, in conjunction with the superintendents of mysteries. The latter are elected in the assembly by open vote, 2 from the general body of Athenians, 1 from the Eumolpidae, and 1 from the Carices. Next, he superintends the Lenaean Dionysia, which consists of a procession and a contest. The procession is ordered by the king and the superintendents in conjunction, but the contest is managed by the king alone. He also manages all the contests of the torch race, and, to speak broadly, he administers all the ancestral sacrifices. Indictments for impiety come before him, or any disputes between parties concerning priestly rights. And he also determines all controversies concerning the privileges of the ancient families and the priests. All actions for homicide come before him, and it is he that makes the proclamation requiring polluted persons to keep away from sacred ceremonies. Actions for homicide and wounding are heard, if the homicide or wounding be wilful, in the Areopagus. So also in cases of killing by poison and of arson. These are the only cases heard by that council. Cases of unintentional homicide, or of intent to kill, or of killing a slave, or a resident alien, or a foreigner, are heard by the court of Palladium. When the homicide is acknowledged, but legal justification is pleaded, as when a man takes an adulterer in the act, or kills another by mistake in battle, or in an athletic contest, the prisoner is tried in the court of Delphinium. If a man who is in banishment for a homicide which admits of reconciliation incurs a further charge of killing or wounding, he is tried in Phreato, and he makes his defense from a boat moored near the shore. All these cases, except those which are heard in the Areopagus, are tried by the Ephetae on whom the lot falls. The king introduces them, and the hearing is held, and in the open air. Whenever the king hears a case, he takes off his crown. The person who is subject to a charge of homicide is at all other times excluded from the temples, nor is he even allowed to enter the marketplace. But on the occasion of his trial he enters the temple and makes his defense. If the actual offender is unknown, the writ runs against the doer of the deed. The king and the tribe kings also hear the cases in which the guilt rests on inanimate objects and the lower animals. Chapter 58. The Polemarch performs the sacrifices to Artemis the huntress and to Enyalios, and arranges the contest at the funeral of those who have fallen in war, and makes offerings to the memory of Harmodius and Aristogiton. Of private actions, those come before him in which resident aliens, both ordinary and privileged, and agents of foreign states are concerned. It is his duty to receive these cases, and divide them into 10 parts, and assign to each tribe the part which comes to it by lot. After which the magistrates who introduce cases for the tribe hand them over to the arbitrators. The Polemarch, however, brings up in person cases in which an alien is charged with deserting his patron, or neglecting to provide himself with one, and also of inheritances and wards of state where aliens are concerned. And in fact, generally, whatever the Archon does for citizens, the Polemarch does for aliens. Chapter 59. The Thesmothetae, in the first place, have the power of prescribing on what days the law courts are to sit, and next of assigning them to the several magistrates, for the latter must follow the arrangement which the Thesmothetae assign. Moreover, they introduce impeachments before the assembly, and bring up all votes for removal from office, challenges of a magistrate's conduct before the assembly, indictments for illegal proposals, or for proposing a law which is contrary to the interests of the state, complaints against prodry or their president for their conduct in office, and the accounts presented by the generals. All indictments also come before them in which a deposit has to be made by the prosecutor, namely, indictments for concealment of foreign origin, for corrupt evasion of foreign origin, when a man escapes the disqualification by bribery, for blackmailing accusations, bribery, false entry of another as a state debtor, false testimony to the service of a summons, conspiracy to enter as a state debtor, corrupt removal from the list of debtors, and adultery. They also bring up the examinations of all magistrates, and the rejections by the demes, and the condemnations by the council. Moreover, they bring up certain private suits in cases of merchandise and mines, or where a slave has slandered a free man. It is they also who cast lots to assign the courts to the various magistrates, whether for private or public cases. They ratify agreements with foreign states to regulate the decision of commercial disputes, and bring up the cases which arise out of such agreements, and they also bring up cases of perjury from the Areopagus. The casting of lots for the jurors is conducted by all the 9 archons, with the clerk to the Thesmothetae as the 10th, each performing the duty for his own tribe. Such are the duties of the 9 archons. Chapter 60. There are also 10 commissioners of games, Athlothetae, elected by lot, 1 from each tribe. These officers, after passing an examination, serve for 4 years, and they manage the Panathenaic procession, the contest in music, and that in gymnastic, and the horse race. They also, in conjunction with the council, see to the making of the robe of Athena, and the vases, and they present the oil to the athletes. This oil is collected from the sacred olives. The archon requisitions it from the owners of the farms on which the sacred olives grow, to the amount of 3/4 of a pint from each plant. Formerly the state used to sell the fruit itself, and if any one dug up or broke down one of the sacred olives, he was tried by the council of Areopagus, and if he was condemned, the penalty was death. Since, however, the oil has been paid by the owner of the farm, the procedure has lapsed, though the law remains, and the oil is a state charge upon the property instead of being taken from the individual plants. When, then, the archon has collected the oil for his year of office, he hands it over to the treasurers to preserve in the Acropolis, and he may not take his seat in the Areopagus until he has paid over to the treasurers the full amount. The treasurers keep it in the Acropolis until the Panathenaea, when they measure it out to the commissioners of games, and they again to the victorious competitors. The prizes for the victors in the musical contest consist of silver and gold, for the victors in manly vigor of shields, and for the victors in the gymnastic contest and the horse race of oil. Chapter 61. All officers connected with military service are elected by open vote. In the first place, 10 generals, strategi, who were formerly elected, 1 from each tribe, but now are chosen from the whole mass of citizens. Their duties are assigned to them by open vote. 1 is appointed to command the heavy infantry, and leads them if they go out to war. 1 to the defense of the country, who remains on the defensive, and fights if there is war within the borders of the country. 2 to Piraeus, 1 of whom is assigned to Munichia, and 1 to the south shore, and these have charge of the defense, and of everything in Piraeus, and 1 to superintend the Simorias, who nominates the triarchs, and arranges exchanges of properties for them, and brings up actions to decide on rival claims in connection with them. The rest are dispatched to whatever business may be on hand at the moment. The appointment of these officers is submitted for confirmation in each prytany when the question is put whether they are considered to be doing their duty. If any officer is rejected on this vote, he is tried in the law court, and if he is found guilty, the people decide what punishment or fine shall be inflicted on him. But if he is acquitted, he holds office for the rest of his term. The generals have full power, when on active service, to arrest anyone for insubordination, or to expel him publicly, or to inflict a fine. The latter is, however, unusual. There are also 10 taxiarchs, one from each tribe, elected by open vote, and each commands his own tribesmen, and appoints captains of companies, locagi. There are also 2 hipparchs, elected by open vote from the whole mass of the citizens, who command the cavalry, each taking 5 tribes. They have the same powers as the generals have in respect of the infantry, and their appointments are also subject to confirmation. There are also phylarchs, elected by open vote, one from each tribe, to command the cavalry, as the taxiarchs do the infantry. There is also a hipparch for Lemnos, elected by open vote, who has charge of the cavalry in Lemnos. There is also a treasurer of the Perilos, and another of the Ammonius, similarly elected. Chapter 62. Of the magistrates elected by lot, in former times some, including the 9 archons, were elected out of the tribe as a whole, while others, namely those who are now elected in the Theseum, were apportioned among the demes. But since the demes used to sell the elections, these magistrates, too, are now elected from the whole tribe, except the members of the council and the guards of the dockyards, who are still left to the demes. Pay is received for the following services. First, the members of the assembly receive a drachma for the ordinary meetings, and 9 obols for the sovereign meeting. Then the jurors at the law courts receive 3 obols, and the members of the council 5 obols. The prytanes receive an allowance of an obol for their maintenance. The 9 archons receive 4 obols apiece for maintenance, and also keep a herald and a flute player, and the archon for Salamis receives a drachma a day. The commissioners for games dine in the Prytaneum during the month of Hecatombeon, in which the Panathenaic festival takes place, from the 14th day onwards. The Amphictyonic deputies to Delos receive a drachma a day from the exchequer of Delos. Also, all magistrates sent to Samos, Skyros, Lemnos, or Imbros receive an allowance for their maintenance. The military offices may be held any number of times, but none of the others more than once, except the membership of the council, which may be held twice. Chapter 63. The juries for the law courts are chosen by lot by the 9 archons, each for their own tribe, and by the clerk to the Thesmothetae for the 10th. There are 10 entrances into the courts, one for each tribe, 20 rooms in which the lots are drawn, 2 for each tribe, 100 chests, 10 for each tribe, 10 other chests, in which are placed the tickets of the jurors on whom the lot falls, and 2 vases. Further, staves, equal in number to the jurors required, are placed by the side of each entrance, and counters are put into 1 vase, equal in number to the staves. These are inscribed with letters of the alphabet, beginning with the 11th, lambda, equal in number to the courts which require to be filled. All persons above 30 years of age are qualified to serve as jurors, provided they are not debtors to the state and have not lost their civil rights. If any unqualified person serves as juror, an information is laid against him, and he is brought before the court, and if he is convicted, the jurors assess the punishment or fine which they consider him to deserve. If he is condemned to a money fine, he must be imprisoned until he has paid up both the original debt, on account of which the information was laid against him, and also the fine which the court has imposed upon him. Each juror has a ticket of boxwood on which is inscribed his name, with the name of his father and his deme, and one of the letters of the alphabet up to kappa; for the jurors in their several tribes are divided into 10 sections, with approximately an equal number in each letter. When the Thesmothetes has decided by lot which letters are required to attend at the courts, the servant puts up above each court the letter which has been assigned to it by the lot. Footnote: the remainder of the treatise, which was written on a separate piece of papyrus, exists only in a mutilated and disfigured condition, which makes continuous decipherment hopeless, though much has been done, especially by Blas, to restore it and indicate its general tenor. It is entirely occupied with the description of the procedure in the law courts, and ends somewhat abruptly. The concluding lines are quite legible, with the statement that when the business of the day is finished, the jurors receive the pay which is due to them for their services. End of chapter 63, and end of the Constitution of Athens, by Aristotle, translated by Sir Frederick Kenyon. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Proof listened by Patty Cunningham. Meta-coordinated by Mary Ann Spiegel. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards.